both Neha Kirpal and Dr. Lakshmi Narasimhan are champions who are kind of very accomplished individuals and trying to mainstream mental health in India. And they are also, both of them, they are continuing to do excellent work, very meaningful work. And I also know that they have plenty to unpack in this session on women and mental health. So I will, I think, straight away dive into the discussion and start by asking you, Neha, about the book Homecoming. We have the book? Yeah, maybe we could. So Homecoming is an anthology of 11 women. They're very powerful accounts of how they navigated severe mental illness. And each account is very poignant, and it also kind of shows or demonstrates the lived experience, which you have tried to highlight. So I would start by asking you, like how difficult or how easy was it for you to put these voices together? And how and why you selected these 11 women in particular for the book?
Thank you. Thank you so much for that and for having us here today. I mean, I think it's, these stories are actually much closer to home than we often admit to ourselves. Many of us are in the room today because we have been caregivers, we have dealt with mental illness in some shape or form, and our lives have certainly been touched by it, if not entirely shaped by it. So for us, the 11 of us who brought our life stories together, it just came together as an organic effort. And the real sort of pain points and trauma and adversities are actually in going through the challenges, not so much in talking about it. The conversation platforms have opened up today where we're sitting here among strangers and talking about schizophrenia and suicide loss. And it's actually wonderfully heartening to have a full house talking about mental health. But these journeys are age-old. And so 11 of us have got together, and we've talked about how over the last 2-3 decades, our lives have been shaped by the mental health challenges. In my case, with a parent with schizophrenia, and as a childhood carer, having lost my sibling to suicide, this is 2 generations of mental illness, and so seeing challenges right from the 80s, and what the care systems were like then, what the stigma was like, what was the level of openness to talk about suicide at an open stage, to today. And similarly, other stories, a lady who's a clinical psychologist dealing with bipolar, been part of mental health institutions and now an academic. Another child psychiatrist who was a childhood carer to a parent with schizophrenia. Someone from the trans community, Zainab Patel, who has talked about growing up in the chawls of Juhu and being in the trans community and dealing with mental health challenges. Every story touches upon suicidality and long-term sort of trauma and various themes. But what it also touches upon is the kind of care and support that we manage to get. The fact that we are all contributing members in society as a philanthropist, as a teacher, as a doctor, as an entrepreneur. It's really talking about the human spirit, the kind of hope that one can generate in spite of difficult, adverse circumstances. I think that really is sort of what brought us together. And it really wasn't hard to talk to people and say, would you like to share? You'd be surprised. Many more people want to share than we think. And everybody is waiting for somebody else to go first. And so I really believe that by bringing these stories together, we've actually started a conversation. Women, men, all genders need to be able to share and shed much more. And so this book is a starting point for that conversation. It is to validate and really recognize what 300 million people in our country are going through. So I think that's really what it is. And focusing on these adverse mental health conditions is also deliberate, because we often talk about, Instagram often talks about anxiety and depression and every quick fix. Sometimes there aren't quick fixes. Sometimes you are living with lifelong conditions. It is about managing. We are losing people. COVID has shown us that this problem is in every household. So how do we normalize? How do we mainstream? We all have to own it. And so this is really the starting of that effort.
That was a nice, wonderful introduction to the book. And I'll continue with you for a little longer, since you have navigated 2 generations. Your mother with schizophrenia and survivor of your brothers.
My brother.
Yeah. So from 1980s to say now 2025, 26, what are those challenges you feel still continue and how much we have come? And maybe briefly you could add for the benefit of the audience about Amaha, the organization that you have founded.
Yeah. I think we owe a lot to the young people today who have really made it okay to talk about some of these issues openly. Social media, of course, COVID, all of this has created public platforms. We find it easier to share with strangers than we do with our own family and friends because of the stigma and shame and so on. So I think Amaha really, which is our mental health organization, started with this effort to say, what have we learned as carers? We have learned that help and care needs to be 24/7. It needs to be accessible in a language that one can speak. And so we today work in 18 languages. We work across 600 cities in the country. And no matter where you may be in the care journey, whether you need inpatient hospitalization or simply online therapy, marital therapy, or peer pressure, bullying support, work with neurodivergent kids and adults with ADHD. So it's the whole range. So can we find places where we go to where there is an ecosystem of care that is possible? I think that's really key because from the 1980s, I've seen the ins and outs of more inpatient centers than maybe most other individuals. And comparing what we saw, at the Banyan, we have Dr. Lakshmi here. My mother came to the Banyan after being homeless for 10 years because her psychosis and her paranoia took her away with my younger brother. And so imagine a family that is urban, educated, elite in Delhi, then being homeless for a period of 10 years, finding that family back, starting the treatment, and my brother goes off to Cambridge. And then because of his own adverse childhood traumas, the difficulties of dealing with it. My mother, on the other hand, untreated, undiagnosed schizophrenia for 20 years, is today stable, sitting in Mumbai, looking after my 13-year-old on one injection every 3 weeks. And here is a recovery and rehabilitation story like none other. Right? So I grew up thinking that this is very difficult and what we've been through is very unique. And then I started working in this space, and the last 5-7 years, there is nothing unique about my story. There are hundreds and thousands of families that the Banyan has seen and so many others where these things happen. Families sort of totally shred apart, lose livelihood, lack of education, no social support, completely abandoned, and then reintegrate. And it is a homecoming, which is what inspired the title of the book as well. We called it Homecoming. I think there's two parts to it: coming home to one's community, one's home, one's own context, but also coming home to ourselves. Because it's really about accepting all parts of our life and our journey, and it is all of that that makes us who we are. And so that's really been sort of the essence of the book. The work that we do at Amaha and Children First is inspired by that. To say, we have over 200-300 clinicians, some specialize in eating disorder and bipolar and addictions, and we try and do all of it. But it's really inspired by saying, how are we really understanding and solving for the needs of that family, the people in front of us, and what they might need today in their care journey. So that's a little bit of our approach and the spirit behind it.
Wonderful. It's so inspiring to hear you speak, Neha. I'll bring you Dr. Lakshmi Narasimhan. You have been with the Banyan for years. And, sorry? Okay. And working at the intersection of mental health and homelessness. So do you think that our stigma and lack of awareness, are they still at the core of the problem? Or yeah.
So I think Neha briefly touched upon the statistics in terms of what the scale of the issue is. That yes, I'm sure most of you have heard about how NIMHANS did this survey in 2019, and we found there are 200 million Indians living with diagnosable mental health conditions, out of which at least 7 to 4 million current prevalence, if you look at it, are people with schizophrenia and bipolar mental health conditions. Can you hear me better now? Yes. Sorry, yeah. So I just want to repeat the statistics that we had this NIMHANS survey in 2019, which spoke about 200 million Indians living with diagnosable mental health conditions, of which a substantial number are also people living with serious mental health conditions, such as, you have diagnosis labels such as schizophrenia and bipolar. one part of it is the scale of it, right? But the most important part that we have learned in the 30-year journey of the Banyan is that when people with serious mental health conditions come to us, they come with a history which is shaped by the social and cultural worlds that they've been a part of. So they have faced caste-based violence. So I've had a client who's seen her son being hanged by a tree because there was a caste-based issue in their village. You know, stories like this, which are innumerable. So if I start speaking, it'll probably take days or even years to finish. You have people families that have really desperately tried to navigate care systems, and then they've met care systems which are very procedural, which don't attend to all of their needs, which think that you can give episodic intervention, you can give this one particular medication, not do follow-up. Because when you live with a serious mental health condition, just like asthma, right? It is a longitudinal care trajectory that you need to take. So you don't move from one crisis to another alone, and that's when care is present. Care needs to be accompanied throughout the person's journey, and it needs to be unconditional and not look for perfect outcomes. Some people may return to work, some people may return back to social roles. So we have many such stories like this. But there are people who may not necessarily make those typical journeys, and yet they can live dignified lives with good quality. So I think, to just answer your question, I think the most important thing I would say is, one part of it is stigma and social exclusion. But what is the genesis of it? There is so much structural equity in Indian society to date, right? Whether it is age-based, gender-based, caste-based, class-based, those which place normative expectations in terms of how a person should appear, what is good behavior, who's also a good patient in some ways, right? So in this book, there are people who talk about, I've sought care for my condition, and then I'm labeled difficult to manage. I'm labeled treatment resistant, right? So I think that's the genesis. So one can't isolate, because we have seen communities open doors. So you know, one of the projects of the Banyan is called Home Again, where we try to find homes in the community, rented in the community, for people with serious mental health conditions who've been in institutions lifelong. They don't return back to their families, or they don't go back to work or live on their own. So what do you do with such people? Should they live forever in the hospital? We've had communities open doors, right? But it takes that work of getting your feet dirty, of moving, engaging in dialogue, creating those spaces. So I would say that maybe the narrative of stigma and social exclusion needs much more reflection in terms of where we move forward as a society.
So here I would really like to ask you, do you think that as a society, we do understand what mental health is? And why are we not able to position mental health as a developmental priority in the country?
So I think there is a policy part of it where mental health sits somewhere between health and disability from a policy perspective. If you look at it from a lived experience perspective, see, typically if you look at the prevalence of schizophrenia, every village that you go, you will find people, families living with mental health conditions, and you will have communities witnessing also this family's experience. So maybe one part of it is, yes, they don't fully necessarily understand it, you know, in terms where, yes, recovery is possible, or these people can move on. Let me not even talk about recovery, that these people can have dignity despite whatever challenges that people live with. So I think perhaps there is that one part of it. But I would say the more important part is not so much to do with awareness as much as creating the space. So when you have workspaces, for instance, open up, include people with psychosocial you know, conditions, have neurodiversity as part of their workplace, and have tangible accommodations, then automatically the narrative shifts. It's not something which is seen as something different anymore, right? So that work needs to be done.
Can I add to that? You know, it's like asking how many people in the room have mental health, right? Who doesn't? So mental health belongs to everybody. Mental illness is a 1 in 4 problem. So the same effort that we make on longevity, on physical health, on our diabetes care, our cardiac health, our preventative health checkups, how can we abandon you know, the fact that our mind sits in our body And mental health is a relational matter. It is about our, our genetics, but it's also about our early childhood experiences. It's also about relocation and divorce and abuse and, bullying and all of these things. And it all these biopsychosocial factors come together. Which one of us is not touched by this? And yet the problem is that we all think it's somebody else's problem until it hits home. And I think that's really what it is. I mean, when we say developmental issue, that's a big way of saying that actually every part of our life is touched by mental health and is shaped by our mental health and vice versa. So when we look at physical health conditions, diabetes, chronic pain, autoimmune, all of these have a massive mental health impact and vice versa. When we look at our education, livelihood, all of these have an impact on mental health and vice versa. So it's connected to every aspect of our life. You cannot actually look at mental health as a subset of health that you will eventually get to once it fully shatters your entire life. So I think this approach of saying that we will deal with it when we are in crisis or when it has become unmanageable is the problem. So early intervention, I don't know how many people in the room know 50% of the mental health challenges can be diagnosed before the age of 15, right? Yeah. And so if you think about it, I mean, I'm a parent in the room of a 13-year-old. I'm sure there are other parents here who are raising teenagers. At the age of 15, if you can diagnose those conditions, if classrooms can be better equipped, if we are allocating more counselors into those, if boardrooms and corporates are making it a priority, then you catch it early. You catch it when it is initial symptoms and you try and solve for it within the family perhaps, within the classroom, and then triage for help. Because we'll never have enough psychiatrists and therapists to deal with the problem. So we shouldn't wait to get to a psychiatrist's room, it's already too late. What is it that we can do in our communities, in our neighborhoods, within our families? Every single person has a role to play, right? So whether you're a parent or a grandparent or a teenager, we can all help each other and we can be mental health first aiders in our schools and in our colleges. That's the kind of change that is needed. To own it as our problem and that the solution doesn't lie outside of us someday, dependent on the government funding or the government policy or so on, right? Coming to the role of the government, I mean, we say that, okay, mental health gets 0.6% of the healthcare budget. I mean, just think about it. And 80% of that, if not more, goes to one mental health institution, which is a government institution. So now we built something called the India Mental Health Alliance. And it is a cross-sectoral alliance of organizations from across the country, 250 organizations coming together to talk about what the community-based mental health challenges are. And that's really what is needed by each of us. What is our part to play in this? And how can we own the problem, understand it better, and then solve for it?
I know the kind of understanding and clarity you have needs to percolate down.
I just want to add one part to this. We talk about, very significantly, everybody talks about the treatment gap in terms of...
I was about to ask you that.
Yeah, so about, even for schizophrenia, about 7 in 10 are out of treatment is a statistic that often gets put out there. And sure, there is that gap. And we already spoke about how there is necessity for bringing in dignity in terms of how we respond in terms of care. But more importantly, I think there's a large gap in terms of integration. So when I come for a mental health experience that's located and intertwined with my experience of, let's say, gender-based inequity, intertwined with my housing situation, with the fact that I need to earn a livelihood, with the fact that I need to have so many of these multifaceted challenges addressed, you can't have it in isolation. So care can't just be, like she said, episodic care is not necessarily what is needed. You need more integration and you need more cross-sectoral integration where it's not just seen as, yes, public health issue and therefore it's addressed, but also addressed as part of many of the other facets of social lives that we lead.
And I think you also mentioned once that accompanying for lifelong. I mean, that has to be there always. These stories of hope are also stemming from stories of exit. So I had this other question about, what is it that we really require to integrate into our policies and practices, for kind of a neat ending, as you said, or kind of building a possible exit pathway?
when you say exit, exit out of what?
Exit out of the condition. And trying to normalize, trying to lead a normal
So I
life.
think when you live with a mental health experience, it's part of your identity. For a lot of people with lived experience, it's part of your identity. And yes, there are some parts that are distressing, for which, yes, we seek care and we seek help, and it helps us sort of tide over the distressing parts. But a large part of it is also this amazing creativity that sometimes comes with it, right? So it is part of who we are, and it stays with us lifelong. So therefore, and this is something that I've alluded to earlier as well, that when a lot of people talk about prevention in a very public health perspective, that what are you trying to prevent? Are you trying to prevent diversity and diversity of experiences? Not to take away from the fact that there are some very distressing parts to a severe mental health condition, but are you trying to take away that diversity? So to just answer your question, can you just repeat that? Sorry, I got sidetracked. So when you look at an exit, so I can talk about, let's say, community re-entry as an exit pathway, right? So you don't live institutionalized long-term within a psychiatric facility, but you need it for acute care. There are certain, just like any other health condition, you do require escalations, but that doesn't need to become your permanent home. So how do you find homes in the community? And is there really necessity to, let's say, measure it with clinical readiness the way we say, ready for discharge now, as we do with any other health condition? In the Banyan's experience, I would say it's not necessarily true. Right? You have people who go back to employment, live independently. So I was talking about people who, have raised their children, come back with marriage invitations, invite them for their graduation ceremonies. Single women who've raised their children, once homeless with a mental health condition. We have people who've gone back to their families, gotten back into those communities and those social worlds. But we also have people for whom perhaps it doesn't look the way all of us think a recovered person should look, but is recovery really the be it and end all that we need to be looking at? So in fact, when we started Home Again, we said that irrespective of where this person is from a clinical perspective, we will offer them an opportunity to live in the community. This person requires assistance with bathing. So what? Put a staff to do it for her. She wants to be clothed in a certain way, have a staff help her. Right. So that's the way I would probably look at it.
Now you put me in doubt because when I use the word exit, because I would like to look at Neha, like you were mentioning how your mom, initially when you were perhaps writing the book and going to write her story, she thought you're marketing her life. But when you went to some other festival and she fed you the hichini and she felt proud that yes, the story is out and it's there to inspire people. Yeah. So I was looking at exit from that point of view. Yeah.
I suppose it's one's inner journey, isn't it? We look at our relationship with shame, our relationship with guilt, and what makes our sense of self. So one thinks about people with severe mental illness and says, this person will not understand. I know when we started building our first mental health hospital, now let's look at the contrast. This is an inpatient acute care hospital, similar to ones my mother has been in maybe 10, 15 times. And yet she's hearing me with the architects trying to build this hospital in a way that is safe and compliant and can deliver the best care. And she's beginning to make the journey of not feeling the shame as much, but feeling proud of the fact that we are now contributing to the life stories of others. And so then when it came to this book, I was very nervous because in the past I have been accused by various family members of publicly talking about our family's challenges and talking about what our journey has been like, what was the response of neighbors and friends from the 1980s onwards, how our school, we couldn't share in school what was happening when my brother and I had got separated in school. And so we've lived a rather stigmatized life for maybe 2 or 3 decades. So today, to talk about it openly, I asked my mother, what did you feel about reading the book? And she took a pause and she said, you have made us immortal because you are helping other people with these stories. I thought that was I can't imagine any sane person saying something like that. And so what is sanity and what is insanity then? Here is someone who is, sitting with an antipsychotic in her stream saying that I'm so glad that you have publicly talked about our life to be able to help other people. And off you go to the Jaipur Lit Fest and Chennai Lit Fest, and while she's sitting and enjoying her old monk in the evening and watching over my daughter. So these are the contrasts. Who would imagine? And then equally, let's think about the children, because look at how my brother suffered. So what happens in a family with mental illness is that we all focus on the person who is sick. And we forget that these are relationships, and it tears the whole family apart. It ruins your economic stability. So how my younger brother was affected, or others in the book who have talked about their children, their siblings. Aparna Piramal, who's also written the book Chemical Khichdi, talks about how her sister, Radhika Piramal, was a big part of her caregiving journey. So we all go through this together. And in India, more so perhaps than in certain Western cultures. So what is the toll that it takes when you're a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old, and now you have a parent who is saying maybe the toothpaste is poison to stop brushing your teeth, right? This is the kind of childhood that we've had. And so hope really for me comes from saying, here we are, right? With that kind of adverse childhood trauma and multiple such incidences, not just in this book, but so many stories that one hears, there are stories out there of people who have not just healed and grieved and recovered, but also, are thriving, are being able to contribute to society in some way, are here to make a difference. Every time somebody shares a story, everybody else gets up and has a story inside them. We are just waiting to share. So I think the one thing I would say is that it's about paying forward. And so if we have been through anything in life, or if we have not, regardless, it is our responsibility to pay it forward by either sharing a story or by asking someone to share theirs. Because if we can open those safe spaces and literally just, sort of within a Lit Fest or within our boardrooms and our companies, everyone around wants to unburden. And we can, community support is the best kind of support. A lot of my learnings came from Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon, which is for families of alcoholics. Really, just a bunch of people sitting together, talking about how their lives have fallen apart and how an addiction has shredded every aspect of dignity and happiness, creates joy, creates hope, because we are able to validate each other's struggles. We are able to share and reconnect. We're able to learn strategies of saying, oh, this is what you did when this happened, and this is what I did. And so, you kind of support each other. And that's really the only solve. There is no silver bullet. There is no psychiatrist sitting out there who knows the answers. And, so really it is for us to own this and try and see what reintegration and, really thriving with mental illness might look like.
This is where I would like to ask both of you about the lived experience expertise, people who have had first-hand experience, they are now coming on board as researchers, and they are at the core of building how to provide good quality mental health care.
So I hope everybody can hear. I'm holding the mic close enough. So one of the important things at the Banyan that we have done, and as part of the work that we are currently engaged in, and we've done it for several years now, is in terms of bringing forward the wisdom and expertise of people who've lived through these journeys of mental health and homelessness. And you intuitively know, when you have walked that path, you intuitively know what it takes to walk that path, and you're able to help and support several others like you. But not just that, what you're also able to do is incisively look at both policy, practice, and research, and be able to inform that, right? So maybe some disciplinary training may be required, maybe some capacities are required in terms of even sheer social capital. So I'm able to sit here and speak today. Can somebody who's part of my team, so 3 out of every 10th staff at the Banyan comes with a lived experience of mental health in the sense of they've also had homelessness and other social marginalities. We're also largely led by women. We're also largely led by people who come from class and caste-based oppressions. So what does it take to enable such people to take these stages and speak from their own synthesis of their own experiences, right? And what is beautiful about this book is it presents the diversity of experiences, yes, but it also speaks to policy and practice in terms of what is it that we need to do to close the care gaps as we see it today. What is it that is needed to do in terms of attending to people's mental health experiences as a society. So there are so many important things that come as part of the book. And the same kind of work the Banyan is also engaging in terms of bringing on board. So as part of my research team, so I lead a research team. Many of them are people who are themselves people with mental health conditions. So the way they look at data, the way they look at writing about insights from the data comes from not just a telling of their narratives and stories, but in terms of synthesizing what is it that needs to change in the mental health landscape. So that is the very important work that we need to do actually, because user survivor scholarship in India, especially from the margins, is very low right now. And the only reason is also because I think that sort of systematic supportive structure for them to also come speak in spaces, write their stories, contribute in ways. Like we are, for instance, we are working on a piece where we want one of our peer lived experience researchers to write a research paper that we are aiming for a typical peer-reviewed journal, a scientific peer-reviewed journal. So why should that only be occupied by people who, let's say, come with certain kind of disciplinary training, but not somebody who's actually walked the path? So that's the sort of a shift that we're trying to bring about.
Yeah, I think to add to that, we are really the true experts of our own life experiences. That's just the bottom line. There is no psychiatrist and no academic in the world who can really understand the length, breadth, depth, and multifaceted impact of mental illness in the way that you can and your carers, right? And so in that sense, clinical expertise, this sort of the biomedical models that we look at, the diagnosis and the treatment plans and how we triage and what kind of outcomes we might get, all of this has to be informed by the experience of people who are actually going through it. And so the lived experience expertise is saying that these stories are not just about, oh, look at what a brave story that is, or look at how well this person has turned out, or how inspiring. But it really is about saying, what is the expertise here? What can doctors learn? What can therapists learn? What can policymakers learn about how to look at the care gaps? What happens before somebody comes into a room? Let's take an example. Somebody is having a psychotic episode or is suicidal or is self-harming, and we need to admit them. And you talk to the doctor says, admit them. But how? Here you have someone who is perhaps violent, very agitated. There is a total relationship and trust breakdown. Every family member has a different game plan of how to approach this. In that context, how are you supposed to ever get to the right treatment center? So these are things that are actually even invisible to the care providers. And so can services be designed to really understand this? Can there be a lived experience expert fellowship? This is something we're working on at the India Mental Health Alliance. We are creating a fellowship of lived experience experts to say, can we create a voice? Can we create legitimacy around that? Can it then inform policy? So that there are, let's say a corporate comes along and says, we need to figure out how to make emotionally healthy workspaces, or a mentally healthy airline, or a mentally healthy school. What are the parameters? What is that baseline looking like? Right? Can we get actual people who have been through these challenges to inform that policy, to inform the system development? So that's really what the expertise is. And so this book is doing that. It's basically stepping back from our journeys and saying, okay, here was our story. Now let us give you our view or our perspective or our learnings on this life that has been lived, and what would we want to leave as a message for mental health practitioners, for policymakers, and for community enablers, right? Everyone who has a sphere of influence can do something to move the cause of mental health. I mean, this is really the silent pandemic. COVID has really helped us see there is no household that is not impacted by mental health challenges. And in the course of our lifetimes, it is a 1 in 4 problem. That means as carers, it impacts everybody. So the time really is now. I'm just leaving that as a nudge.
Since you said it impacts everybody, I'll digress a bit. And I know we are discussing in this session women and their mental health journeys. What about men? I mean, how are their challenges different, and how is their caregiving or treatment different?
Yeah. I think just to say that this book is also 11 women. We hope that it is the beginning of a conversation. We hope the men will follow, as is the norm. But I think mental health conversations tend to come easier with women. It's also the bulk of the problem. There are so many invisible challenges that women go through. Everything from, postpartum, menopause, menstruation, sexual abuse, so many challenges that women go through, the caregiving burden on women. And so it is different. And Dr. Lakshmi will add to this in terms of sort of the various other social determinants that impact women adversely. When it comes to men's mental health, it's really time to talk about it, because it is very, very hard. This is the social conditioning that we grow up with. Men don't cry. Boys who talk about their feelings are weak. The man's role is the provider, and if you're not successful at your work and providing for a family of, 5 or 6, then you are a letdown. So there are these images that we have of how men need to show up in society. That is a real problem. Same stereotyping exists for women. So I think if we just bring ourselves down to a basic human being level and say, what are the things that make me who I am? Once you strip away all the labels and all the achievements and the professional pathways, really as human beings, we are all dealing with a sense of identity, a question around that. Where are we getting our sense of self-worth? What are the fears and insecurities that are driving us? Our relationship with guilt, shame, it's all the same. So men need to talk about it, and there need to be forums for that. But maybe you have some statistic to offer as well.
So what I would say is, when it comes to a serious mental health condition, some studies, of course, show slightly different patterns, but largely there are no gender variations, so to say. But what is gendered is in the nature in which the experience plays out. What kind of setbacks do you face as a result of social exclusion? So for instance, you've been a homeless man with a psychosocial disability, and it's time for you to return to your family, or you seek to return back to your family. You may find it far more difficult if you do not meet the normative expectations of what a working man needs to be. A man needs to be a provider. For a woman, it will be very different because of the gendered nature of the problem. So I think the experiences are different. What we do know from research, though, is that if you're a woman, if you come from a caste-oppressed location, if you live in poverty, your risks, if you develop a serious mental health condition, of descending into further, what we call a social drift, further into poverty and homelessness, are manifold. Women also do the larger part of caregiving. So if you look at the Banyan's database, on any single day, you do a filter of what is the gender of carers, not that there aren't men. Largely it falls on the woman. So I think the gendered nature of how each one is located within society shapes your mental health experience. And that, I would say, is the difference, rather than gross variations in terms of who faces mental health conditions in and itself more.
I can share an anecdote from my personal life. My younger brother, after spending 10 years caregiving to my mother with schizophrenia, when he came back, the pressure on him as a young 22-year-old was to play catch-up with his friends so that he can also integrate into society, he can also get a job, he can also start earning and building a family and all of that. And that's really what, was the problem, that expectation, because he came back, he within 2 months topped the A-levels, got into Cambridge, studied economics honors, started a startup, wanted to raise money, really wanting to, the 10-year gap that he had, in his mind, the main thing was, how do I quickly catch up and become the normal male, with all the right attributes and worthy of raising a family. I think that pressure really eventually is what he gave into. If I was to look at all the notes that he left us, it was really about saying, I'm sorry to disappoint everybody. I'm sorry that I was too weak to continue suffering, and I didn't want to burden anyone else. And, so therefore, so I think, it's so invisible how much men carry. And it really is important to recognize that we are reeling within ourselves, and it's sort of toxic, and these things don't go away. So I think the one thing that one can accept is that any of these things, men, women, any gender, when you don't deal with it, it doesn't go away, it catches up. My brother did all of that, he went to Cambridge, he did everything, but eventually at 38, it all got to him, and he was ready to, in a way, take his life and his death decision in his own hands. So I think for a lot of people, and especially for men, it is left, and you look at this in the suicide rates and things, it becomes clear. Also today, for the age of 15 to 29, the #1 cause of death is suicide. And it is more skewed for the men than for the women. And so we have to look at suppression. We have to look at why is it that we are not creating that space and context, that allowance within men to talk about their challenges and their issues or whatever they've been through. There has to be a book on men's mental health. I would be very happy to talk to any men in this room who want to bring their stories into a book like this. I hope that we can do many languages and go across genders and really be able to build on this as a movement. So homecoming is only the start, and I can see some people raising their hands. So thank you.
Yeah, so I think, so you need a lot of mental health ambassadors. We need to talk about that. I mean, and you were talking about, the whole issue of common mental health and severe mental illness. Yeah. So how we can all play a role as mental health ambassadors. And I think we will have a lot of questions. We are also running out of time. Yeah. So we'll quickly try to wrap up this round.
Yeah, so I like to say that those of us who have had the blessing of trauma have had no choice but to fall apart and rebuild ourselves and just about managed wherever we are at in life. But those who haven't, please think about the privilege and think about the collective responsibility. You know that if you look left and right in your living rooms, in your classrooms, in your boardrooms, if you have sort of somehow managed to get to that stage in life without being touched by these, you know that the next person hasn't, because those are just the statistics. So can we show up with compassion? Can we show up recognizing that literally everyone is walking around carrying a bit of this within themselves? So nobody else is going to come and be an ambassador and come and rescue us, right? What is that ambassadorship that we can play within ourselves? How does that show up in our parenting? How does that show up in the way we are with our support staff at home or with our drivers or with our employers or employees? It's really about that. It's about owning it. If you can do only one thing, then just share your story or hold space for somebody else's stories. Because stories are what change it. No amount of a doctor coming and talking to you about saying this will happen, that will happen, will make any difference. Our own stories are relatable. We see each other in our own stories. And sharing stories really is the most powerful thing that one can do, and holding space for others. So I think that is real ambassadorship. And that is something that needs no qualifications, and it doesn't need any excuses. So we should really make that pledge to ourselves, and really at least that is in everybody's hands, in our language, in our communities, in our spheres of influence. What can I do to make sure that I show up to create a more mentally healthy, aware, supportive community? I think that's really what it is.
Lakshmi, last quote from you, because mental health is systemic. It does not just depend on mental health practitioners and mental health organizations. We all have to take ownership. So we'll wind up with your quote.
So I'll actually end with a story which I think everyone needs to exemplify and learn from Amelie, a colleague of mine. Amelie and Jacqueline were sisters who were both homeless with a mental health condition, came to the Banyan. They went back to their small village in Trichy and they said, we need to do something for mental health in our village. They're not people who've gone through a typical education. Jacqueline, of course, is a qualified diploma in nursing, but Amelie has not really gone through schooling as it were to be. Today, they run the Trichy chapter of the Banyan. They are project leaders of the Banyan in Trichy. Amelie has she has employed so many women, and these are women who are living without, majority of them, so 95% of her staff are women who live without spousal support, who themselves come with lived experience. So she has built something very beautiful over there, right? So that is what is mental health ambassadorship for me. that when you use this journey of yours, but you're also, and so much of resistance from the community, right? So these were people who were once given food from under a locked door because the community was so scared, who are now sought after for mental health help in their communities. So what courage it took for them to persist and to reshape an entire community around them. I think that is what is mental health ambassadorship, and a lot needs to be done by policy practitioners, organizations like us, to create a million such stories. I would say that's where we need to head.
Right. Well said. We are into the last 5 minutes of the program, and the floor is open for questions. And I could already see a lot of hands coming up. So yes, sir, please.
Having done so much for mental health, have you sensitized the family physicians, the local GPs in dealing with these problems? And do you feel there's any space at all for alternative medicine in this sphere?
Sorry?
Alternative medicine in this sphere. I'm curious.
So there are people who simultaneously practice different forms of therapies, right? I think a large part of your experience of living with your mental health is that you also need to be able to choose. So there are people who've done all. I haven't read up enough to comment on whether there is scientific validity to it or not. But in our practice, we see people simultaneously persist with different forms of help that they seek. So along with this medication, sometimes they go for alternative practices. Many people also go for spirituality. So we don't necessarily condemn it unless it's very ostensibly harmful. Each of us should be allowed to somehow navigate around, the way we deal with our mental health.
Yeah, and sir, to your point, not just pediatricians, general physicians, gastro doctors, pain doctors, but also faith-based healers. With the churches and the mosques and the temple, and faith-based healers. How many people turn to art of living before they go to a psychiatrist, right? So it really is about saying that we have to go wherever people go and be able to work together. And this siloed approach, this is what the problem is. This biomedical model, which basically says this is the way Western medicine deals with it and this is the way alternative medicine deals with it. This siloed approach is the problem because different things work in combination for different people. So we have to look at it more holistically. Thank you for that.
Could somebody give the mic right at the back? There are two gentlemen raising their hands for long.
Can I ask now? Yes. Okay, yeah. Being employed.
Oh, okay. Please
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Being employed in a creative industry, as we know, the creative industry, one of the most toxic industry to work with. Like an artist and film people, like creative designers, fashion designers, textile designers have been struggling with the mental health for long time. That statistically 60 to 70% of the people in the creative workplace experiencing mental health issues is, and out of the 60%, 80% of the people, they don't get access to the mental health problem, and they get bipolar, schizo problems, and general anxiety disorders. So how to, and what are your insights for the people who work in a creative industry and how to overcome from that?
Yeah.
And for your information, I would like to add one point. I'm also taking a therapy, and I would advise everybody to consult a therapy for your better mental outcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And the creative industries, one way of looking at it is that there are more mental health challenges, as he said. But the other way of looking at it is that the creative industries is one of those where there is more openness, there is more freedom in expressing and dealing with it. In what feels like a previous life, I founded the India Art Fair and spent 10 years working with artists and galleries and engaged with all things artistic. It was really so inspiring to see how trauma and how resilience and mental health challenges were broken down and dealt with through the arts and through that sense of community. So it is a gift also that the creative community has of that free expression, which the corporate folks may not as much have. So that's sort of what I would say. But yeah, everybody needs help across sectors. Certainly the venture capitalists and the bankers and the people who are healthcare professionals, right, where burnout is so great. Startup founders, we're putting ourselves in these pressure cooker situations. and then we don't know how to deal with it. So it's really across every sector and every age profile.
Yeah, the gentleman right at the back. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was so beautiful how you said that we have to people who are lucky enough to not be touched with trauma or mental health issues should show up with compassion. I just wanted to ask what or how can people like these actually combat compassion fatigue and not get burnt out so that they can be there for their loved ones who are struggling with mental health issues. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's the same, in the airplane, you put the mask on yourself first. So it's really a bit of a cliche, but I can tell you from my own life as a single mother to a 13-year-old, a child carer to a parent with psychosis, with a brother who struggled as well. Boundaries and being able to keep your own bucket full, whether it's with a sense of purpose or a sense of joy or whatever it is, has got to be the first priority. There is absolutely no way that, these are long-term, lifelong journeys often. You cannot sustain them by simply braving it out, faking it to make it. This resilience as a word is massively overrated and completely misunderstood. I really feel like being vulnerable, grieving, crying your heart out, owning your pain and making time for yourself is so important. So that is step one. And actually it comes above every other step. And then whatever is left of you, you sort of offer to the others and take back whenever you need to. So it's an ongoing process, iterative process that one must do for ourselves.
We'll take one last question from the lady at the back.
Good evening. 3 questions. One is, can you please give a briefer about your organization?
We have run out of time. Please keep it brief.
Can you give a brief about your organization which supports mental health and how we can support as a community? And what is your opinion about side effects of medicines which is given for mental health?
So,
Actually, I've already spoken about. You could do about the medicine side effect.
yes, medicine side
Yeah,
effects.
so
if you'd like.
so that's a reality that we work with now. So there are constraints. We've come a long way from the antipsychotics that we had, let's say even 50 years ago to where we are now. So we have to understand that mental health science in terms of the pharmacology is still evolving and there are new discoveries being made, but it's not perfect. We also don't understand perfectly what the mechanism really is. So it's not like a perfect chemical imbalance. You put the medication, it fixes it. It produces a different mental state, which maybe makes your life more bearable. For a lot of people, that's the reality. There are side effects. But for many people who are on long-term medication, there are 2 aspects to it. And antipsychotic discontinuity is something that many people attempt. But there are 2 parts to it. Yes, there is one part of it which numbs me, which takes away some of my cognition. I face deficits on account of it. I have weight gain and all of it. But there's another part of me which sees to the fact that at least I'm not having this episodes now and then. I'm not on this, going from one institution to another, moving into homelessness, coming back home again, quitting several jobs. So this is giving me some sense of stability. So many people negotiate, and it's a daily tension that they negotiate. So one has to sort of understand and be honest in terms of this dialogue of these are the constraints that you're working under, and therefore you sort of make your peace with it. At least that's the way that I've seen many of the people that I work with navigate this tension.
I think just to add to that, side effects is about perspective. So you really have to recognize what is truly important, because it's often a trade-off, right? There's no silver bullet, and then you find the best balance.
Okay, thank you, Neha and Lakshmi, for the valuable inputs, and the audience for your relevant questions. And Neha, you're available for signing books.